So let's talk about the new code of points. Hey guys, it's Sophie. Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, welcome. So today we're gonna do part 2 of my little mini series on the 2025 to 2028 code of points and kind of an overview of some of the major changes compared to the previous code of points. So today we're gonna be focusing on the DB panel, body difficulty. I will link the code of points up here so you guys can follow along with all the pages I'm mentioning. But just a quick disclaimer like before, I'm not claiming to be an expert in this code of points. If I missed anything or if you notice anything that's incorrect, please let me know. I'm still very much learning this myself, but hopefully this is still helpful in some capacity, so let's get into it. What I actually want to start off with is the movements with the apparatus. Because if you guys have watched any of my previous videos, in particular the apparatus series, I talked a lot about fundamental movements with the apparatus. Because in the past code of points, and actually many previous code of points, each apparatus had like 4 or 5 fundamental apparatus movements. And they also had like a set of what was called non-fundamental apparatus movements, but it was just like, recommended ways to manipulate the apparatus. But there were 4 or 5 ones that were mandatory in every routine. So like, for example, ball had like rolls, bounces, figure eights. Clubs had things like mills, the little flips, circles, asymmetric, things like that were mandatory to have in each routine, or else you would get deducted for missing one of those groups. One of the biggest changes that's coming to this code of points is that these fundamentals don't exist anymore. Like, they're not called fundamentals anymore. Fundamentals, non-fundamentals, they're all just grouped together into what's called technical apparatus movements. That's kind of how they're phrased now. They still kind of serve the same purpose, where it's like common ways to manipulate the apparatus that you use in your masteries or in your body difficulties, but there's no longer specific ones that are mandatory to have in each routine. Now moving on to the 4 major categories, let's start with difficulty. So one big change that is also happening this code of points is that there are new limits to the number of body difficulties, apparatus difficulties, so masteries, and risks that you can have in your routines. In the last code of points, you were allowed for seniors to have 9 body difficulties, I believe 20 masteries or apparatus difficulties, and 5 risks. You can now only have 8 body difficulties in your routine, 15 apparatus difficulties, and 4 risks. And I think this was done to kind of minimize the number of things that you needed to do in your routine to focus on more of the composition rather than just element after element after element. So yeah, new limits, less of everything allowed in your routines. Anything above that just isn't counted. Like, you can do more if you want, they just won't be counted. And then you risk getting like execution deductions for them. So wouldn't recommend. Now focusing specifically on DB, the DB judges will judge your body difficulties, so your jumps, your balances, and your turns, as well as your risks. So in the code of points, you can see a set of tables that kind of go through every single like possible balance, jump, and turn, and their associated point values. So I'll leave the pages down here if you want to check those out in depth. But if you take a look at them, you'll notice that some difficulties were moved into the same box. And if they're in the same box, essentially they are considered the same difficulty. I don't think this covers all of them, but things like split arch and split ring jumps, they are now considered the same difficulty. Things like penché balances and penché with the ring, which they call in the code of points, it's called sakura. Same with the turns. Those penché straight leg, penché bent leg, same difficulty now. So if you do both of them, the second one doesn't count because it's essentially like you're repeating the same element. And same with like stag arch and double stag jumps, same difficulty. So a lot of things like that are now considered the same thing, and you can't repeat both variations of them, which for me personally would have been a problem as somebody who did penché straight leg balance, penché bent leg balance, penché straight leg turn, penché bent leg turn, split arch and split ring jumps in the same routine. That would have been an issue for me. There are probably more as well, so definitely take a look for things like that. Basically, if they're in the same box, they're considered the same difficulty. Sticking with the tables, there are also some difficulties that have changed in value slightly, have gone up or down 0.1. I'm not going to sit here and go through every one of them, but you can take a look in the code of points to see what the new point values are for those. But for the most part, a lot of things are relatively the same. I think one of the biggest changes that I think is worth mentioning here is fouetté turns. Because if you guys watched any gymnastics in the last 3 years in this last code of points, you would see that pretty much every gymnast did fouetté turn. And as they should, because it was a highly valuable element. Each turn would be worth 0.2, and then, you know, some people would do like, I don't know, up to 10 in your routine, and that's one difficulty worth 2 points, right there in a few seconds. So it was definitely a really good difficulty to put in your routines, easy way to get quick points. But now the way they evaluate it is changed a little bit. So the base for your fouette turn, fouette with straight leg, sorry, I should be clear, this is fouette with straight leg. Now instead of getting 0.2 every time you do a turn, you only get 0.2 for the first turn, that's your base, and then each additional rotation is only 0.1 now. It's not going to end up being worth as much as it was in the previous code of points. Also, one thing that was mandatory in your fouette turns in the past was every 2 turns, well, not like 2 rotations, but every second time you like put your foot down, you had to change the movement you did with the apparatus. Now, you only need to do an apparatus technical movement within the first 2 components, so like 2 times where you put your foot down. And in those first 2 times, you have to do some sort of apparatus technical movement. Afterwards, nothing's required. You can do other stuff with the apparatus, but you can repeat those in other difficulties later, and that won't be a problem. Which I think is good, because if you're doing that many fouettes, it's eating up a lot of technical movements with the apparatus. And for those who don't know, you need to use a different technical movement with the apparatus in each body difficulty you can't repeat. Another important thing is you can only do one type of fouette turn per routine. So there's passé fouette and there's fouette with straight leg. You can only do one or the other in your routine. I don't know if the fouette with like you're holding your leg to the side, if that applies to this as well. But pretty much, yeah, you can only do one type of fouette balance per routine. If you try a second one, they won't count it. And you also can't like switch your fouette position mid-turn. Like you can't do like, I don't know, 4 rotations with straight leg and then switch to passé for the next 4. They'll stop once you change the position, they'll stop counting. So that's a pretty big one, because that was a very common element in the last code of points, which I'm glad I wasn't competing for that, because not my forte. Another thing that I think it was new in the last code of points was this notion of combined difficulties, where if you did, 2 different difficulties without like putting your support leg down, they would count as one difficulty, but would be worth the value of basically 2. Those are not a thing anymore. If you try to do a combined difficulty, they'll count it as 2 separate difficulties. So you still get the same point value, but now you're using up 2 body difficulty spots instead of just 1. You'll likely be seeing a lot less of those in this coming cycle. And one last thing, on the body difficulty portion, is the idea of waves. There used to be a requirement that you had at least 2 different body waves in your routines. I think it was 2, and the body difficulty judges would keep track of that. Not a requirement anymore, so do with that as you will. Whew, this is going to be a long video. I think that's everything for body difficulties that I wanted to mention, so let's move on to risks, which is still judged by the DB judges. For those who don't know, the definition of a risk is just a high throw, minimum 2 rotations underneath, 2 full rotations, and then a catch of the apparatus, and then you can add on lots of different criteria here and there. One thing that the previous code of points brought into the world of gymnastics was this illusion risk that you also probably saw almost every single gymnast do in a lot of their routines. This is not going to be valid anymore, because technically it doesn't meet the definition of a risk where you need 2 full rotations under the flight of the apparatus. I think they also took it out for the safety of the gymnast. I heard a lot of people were getting injuries because of it, so I think that also contributed to why they took it out. The one exception to that definition of a risk is the jeté risk, where you like throw in the first jeté jump, do another one under the flight, and catch in the third one. I believe that is still valid, so that's good for anyone who's doing it. There are a couple different like groups of rotations you can use in your risks. So there's like pre-acrobatic elements like your walkovers, cartwheels, etc. And then there's vertical rotations like your chaînés, your cat jumps, etc. Check the pages that I've written down here to see specifically what each of them are, but pretty much you can use the first vertical rotation group in 2 different risks. Otherwise, you can't repeat the same like rotation in multiple risks. There have also been a number of criteria that usually you'd be able to add on to your risk for extra 0.1 here and there that have now been removed. So there's a lot of things that won't get you extra points now in terms of risks. Just to name a few, this might not be all of them. You don't get extra credit for doing a rebound on the floor. Like if you were to do your throw like 2 chaînés or something and then let the ball bounce on the floor and then bounce off your chest during a cartwheel. doesn't count anymore. Passing through the hoop in a throw, so if you were to like jump and then throw it, that doesn't give you any extra anymore. Even like when you throw the hoop that way where the hoop rotates around its axis like that, no extra criteria for that anymore. Rethrows after a catch, like in like illusion or something, or actually like I had in ball where I would catch a back walkover and then rethrow, those are not worth any extra. Any catches under your leg, when you catch one club in the hand that's already holding the other club, none of those give you an extra 0.1 anymore, and they used to in the previous code of points. Okay, so let's talk about how this is going to be reflected in competitions, all of these changes. And honestly, I don't think it's going to be that much of a noticeable difference from an audience perspective. I think what you might see though is a little bit more variety in the types of body difficulties people are doing within their own routines, just given that you can't do difficulties that are in the same box, like your split arch and split ring, for example, and the fact that they're limiting the number of different fouette pivots you can do, and also just number of like fouettes you can do within the same pivot. So yeah, more variety there, but I think across routines you'll still see a lot of the same difficulties. Definitely still a lot of fouette pivots. I've been seeing also a lot of the kind of side scale with bent leg pivot. I think is it Sophia Raffaelli's turn? Is it named after her? Anyways, that pivot I've been seeing a lot of lately because, you know, for some of those more challenging pivots, like that one, side scale, Abruzzini MG, those kind of pivots only need half a rotation to get the base value of like 0.5 or 0.6, and then each additional rotation is 0.2. So if you do like one full rotation, it's 0.7 or 8 around there already, which is a pretty significant amount. It's more you can get from any like jump or balance. And again, nothing really noticeable from the risk perspective. I mean, you won't see that illusion risk. You'll still see lots of those jeté risks likely. Maybe some more similar types of risks given that some criterias are no longer valid, but again, nothing like terribly noticeable from an audience perspective. So I'm gonna finish off the video here. In the next part and final part, I'll go over the other 3 panels, so DA, artistry, and execution, and we'll dive into the changes on those panels. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful or informative in some way. If you have any further questions, let me know in the comments, or if you have any other video suggestions in terms of the code of points or more tutorials, because I can still do some tutorials. Hopefully I'm still somewhat in shape. But yeah, you know the gist, the like, comment, subscribe, post notifications, all that fun stuff. And then I'll see you guys very soon with a brand new video. Bye.